Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into a pretty sprawling organization, the ALEC network.
That's right. It's this global network, over 600 think tanks in more than 100 countries.
And we want to explore how it works to influence some really key areas. Things like climate action, deregulation.
And corporate power, yeah. That's the core focus. Our mission here is to unpack how this network coordinates all these affiliates.
To really understand their ideological aims.
Exactly. And for this, we've pulled from a lot of sources: investigative reporting, financial records, the think tank's own stuff, academic work, watchdog reports.
A real mix. And what jumps out right away is just how big it is, but also how it manages to stay, well, largely out of the public eye for the most part.
It's quite effective at that. It kicked off back in 1981, founded by Sir Anthony Fisher.
Fisher, right. He was inspired by Friedrich Hayek, wasn't he?
Deeply. The goal from the start was promoting those free market principles, limited government.
But it's not just a think tank, is it? It's something more.
That's a crucial point. It's often called a think tank that creates think tanks. It's really about building the infrastructure.
Okay, so what does that infrastructure look like? Funding, obviously.
Funding, yes, but also training. They have the ALEC Network Academy.
Right, teaching skills like fundraising, marketing.
All of that. Fundraising, marketing, leadership management, and maybe most importantly, fostering that global network connecting all these groups.
And that network has seen some serious growth.
Huge growth, especially after the 2008 financial crisis. It went from maybe 120 affiliates to nearly 600 now.
Wow, that really ramps up its potential influence, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So for this deep dive, we're really honing in on a few key activities.
Like climate change skepticism?
Skepticism, yeah, or sometimes outright denial, pushing for deregulation, especially things that help the fossil fuel industry.
And that whole anti-ESG push we hear about.
That too, environmental, social governance standards, and critically, how they cultivate political allies.
Okay. But you mentioned it's not always flat-out denial on climate.
No, it's often more nuanced. Many affiliates focus on the economics, arguing climate policies are too expensive, or renewables aren't viable. It's a pretty flexible approach.
But there's a core group pushing denial hard.
Oh, definitely. A hardcore, yes. It's a spectrum, but the overall direction against strong climate action is clear.
Okay, so let's start trying to map this out. Who are the main players?
Well, think of the ALEC network itself as the central connector.
It's a hub.
Right, linking up these freedom intellectuals, as they're sometimes called, with local think tanks all over the world. They help with travel, funding, swapping ideas.
And sounds like there's a deliberate strategy to spread specific ideas.
Very deliberate. They replicate policy ideas and campaign tactics globally. It creates this powerful, mutually reinforcing echo chamber.
Ideas bouncing around the world.
Pretty much. So we've looked at a selection of these affiliates, focusing on the ones really active against environmental policies. Let's start in the U.S.
Okay, U.S. first. The Cato Institute comes to mind. Longtime member, gets funding from the PM network.
Right. Cato pushes climate skepticism generally and fights against major climate regulations.
And there's the Heartland Institute. They were members until 2020.
Correct. But they got significant funding from Koch, ExxonMobil, the Mercers, Donors Trust.
Big names.
Very big. And Heartland is firmly in the hardcore climate denial camp. Anti-Paris Agreement, anti-EPA. They even tried to get denial materials into schools.
Into K-12 curriculum. Wow.
Yeah, it really shows how systematic this is, targeting policy, public opinion, education.
Okay, who else in the U.S.? Heritage Foundation.
Heritage, yeah. A former partner, but still deeply connected through funding from Koch, ExxonMobil, SCAFE. Very influential.
Climate skeptics, too.
Definitely. And they're the main force behind Project 2025.
We'll need to unpack Project 2025 later, but it's basically anti-EPA, pro-fossil fuel.
In a nutshell, yes. Plus anti-ESG and pushing those election integrity narratives.
Got it. What about ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council?
ALEC is crucial. They're an ATLAS partner funded by Koch, Philip Morris, energy companies, pharma, a real mix of corporate interests.
And they write model bills for states, don't they?
Exactly. Model bills opposing climate action, supporting fossil fuels, pushing back on ESG, and again, those election integrity laws.
Okay. Manhattan Institute.
Another member, PM network funding. Climate skepticism, pushing pro-fossil fuel policies.
And the Competitive Enterprise Institute, CEI.
CEI, also a member, funded by PM Network, ExxonMobil. deep into climate denial, fighting regulations, and they use lawsuits strategically.
Strategic litigation. That sounds pointed.
It is. And the network even branches into, well, religious spheres. The Acton Institute.
Acton. They link free markets and religion.
Yeah, member funded by PM Network, Koch. They show climate skepticism partly via figures like Calvin Beisner.
Beisner. He founded the Cornwall Alliance too, didn't he?
He did. Cornwall is an evangelical group very much promoting climate denial.
Arguing it's not really human-caused or dangerous.
Essentially, yes. Framing environmentalism as a threat. Beisner's links to Acton and Atlas Awards really tie it together.
And one more U.S. example, E&E Legal.
Energy and Environment Legal Institute. Funded by Donors Trust, coal money, their main game is strategic litigation.
Targeting who?
Climate scientists, the EPA, trying to bog them down.
Okay, let's jump across the pond. The UK?
Sure. Institute of Economic Affairs, the IEA. Member funded by PM Network, BP, ExxonMobil.
And their stance.
Pro-fossil fuels fracking, North Sea oil, anti-net zero targets, climate skepticism.
They're part of that Tufton Street group, right? Along with the Adam Smith Institute.
ASI, exactly.
Okay.
Also members funded by tobacco, others, same pro-fracking, pro-North Sea, anti-regulation line as IEA.
And the Taxpayers Alliance, TPA.
Also Tufton Street, also a member, pro-fossil fuel, anti-carbon tax, a consistent message from that cluster.
Right. Canada next.
Canada has key players too. The Fraser Institute, longtime member Koch and ExxonMobil funding.
And their focus.
Climate denialism, fighting carbon taxes, anti-EV mandates, very pro-oil.
The McDonald-Laurier Institute, MLI.
MLI, another member. Funded by Koch, CAPP, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, Imperial Oil.
Well, fossil fuel funding there too.
Clearly, they oppose emissions caps, EV mandates, attack greenwashing laws, pro-fossil fuel through and through.
And the Montreal Economic Institute.
Another Canadian member pushing denial and fighting climate policies. It really shows this isn't just a U.S. phenomenon. The pattern repeats.
Okay, let's shift continents. South America, Brazil.
Brazil's interesting. The Instituto de Estudos Empresariais, i.e. Atlas partner, even won an Atlas Award.
They host the Liberty Forum.
They do, and they have strong links to Bolsonaro agribusiness, all while pushing free markets.
And Instituto Liberal.
Also an Atlas partner in Brazil, openly backed Bolsonaro, free markets, anti-environmental regulation rhetoric.
What about Instituto Millennium?
Not a direct Atlas member, but in the same orbit. They actually placed staff in Bolsonaro's government, which helped legitimize his anti-environment policies.
Okay, back to Europe.
In France, you have IFREP. They're an Atlas affiliate. They analyze the policies of Marine Le Pen's party, the RN, and push deregulation.
And the Institut de Formation Politique, IFP.
IFP is noted for being close to Atlas. They train right-wing figures, potentially linked to RN, and get funding from pro-RN sources.
Slovakia.
ISS is an Atlas partner there. They critique the EU Green Deal, push market-based energy ideas.
And the Conservative Institute, KI.
KI is linked through people and events promoting similar conservative, market-oriented views.
Down in Australia.
Institute of Public Affairs, IPA member, active climate skepticism, pro-fossil fuel advocacy.
And the Center for Independent Studies, CIS.
CIS, another member, promotes free markets, anti-regulation. Same themes again.
And just quickly, you mentioned some others benefiting from Atlas and Exxon funding.
Yeah, Timbro in Sweden linked to spreading climate disinformation funded via Atlas by Exxon.
Okay.
Libertad y Desarrollo in Chile, Fundación Libertad in Argentina, both partners, promoting free markets, anti-regulation. Fundación Libertad has links to Mali. And in India, the Center for Civil Society and the Liberty Institute both got Atlas Exxon funding, both push free markets.
It's a huge list. And you said this is just a selection.
Just a snapshot, hundreds more partners globally.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just about sharing ideas. You mentioned cultivating political relationships.
Absolutely. That's a core function, turning ideology into actual policy through political actors.
Let's look at some examples. Brazil and Bolsonaro. You mentioned the IE.
Yes, the Instituto de Estudos Empresarios. Atlas partner, Liberty Forum host. Their founder, Winston Ling, actually introduced Bolsonaro to Paulo Guedes.
Guedes, who became his powerful economy minister.
Exactly. That's a direct line. And other IE members joined Bolsonaro's economic team.
So embedding their people right inside the government.
Pretty much. And remember, Instituto Millennium, they also supplied staff. Instituto Liberal, another Atlas partner, backed him publicly.
People from all these groups were even on his transition team.
Yes. And the result was policies that lined up perfectly with the think tank's priorities.
Like weakening environmental agencies.
Weakening Arbama, ICM Bio, questioning conservation areas, indigenous lands, pushing capitalist solutions for the Amazon, which often meant favoring agribusiness and resource extraction.
And his rhetoric dismissed international environmental concerns, too.
Consistently, painted them as threats to sovereignty or development. It's a clear case study of how these think tanks provide the intellectual framework and personnel.
Okay, let's switch to Canada. Pierre Poilievre.
Leader of the Conservatives. His political roots trace back to Stephen Harper.
Harper, who pulled Canada out of Kyoto and wasn't exactly known for climate enthusiasm.
Right, and Harper still associates with Atlas-linked figures like Bjorn Lomborg. Poilievre himself has voted against environmental protection hundreds of times.
Hundreds.
Around 400, according to reports. He's dead set against carbon pricing, wants to scrap the federal tax entirely, pledged to repeal environmental laws like Bill C-69 and C-48.
And he frames Canadian oil and gas very positively.
Calls it ethical and environmentally sound. This platform is almost a mirror image of what you hear from the Fraser Institute and the Macdonald-Laurier Institute.
Both Atlas affiliates, both getting coke and fossil fuel funding.
Exactly, and both constantly attacking climate regulations. It shows how the network can really shape a major party's agenda.
Okay, USA, Donald Trump. You describe the relationship as symbiotic.
Incredibly so. The Heartland Institute, remember, the former Atlas member, Major Denial Group, openly bragged about being extremely influential in Trump's circles.
Was there evidence for that?
Plenty. They advised his transition team, gave him that 10-point anti-climate wish list, worked with his EPA.
And the Paris Agreement withdrawal.
Directly aligned with Heartland's push. Their CEO was even there for the announcement.
And Heritage Foundation, key player there too.
Huge player. Long Atlas ties, big funding from network donors. They were Trump's shadow transition team back in 2016, and now they're driving Project 2025.
Right, Project 2025 again. The plan to dismantle climate regs, gut the EPA, boost fossil fuels.
Exactly, and it's staffed by loads of people from Trump's first administration. That revolving door in action.
Trump's drill baby drill mantra sounds a lot like Heartland and Heritage.
It's the same tune.
Okay, back to the UK. Nigel Farage. You called him a transatlantic bridge.
He really connects the UK and US anti-climate networks. Close ties to Trump, works with US Atlas groups like Heartland, spoke at their fundraisers, helped launch their UK branch.
Echoing drill baby drill.
He did. And his party, Reform UK, is campaigning to scrap the UK's net zero target and ramp up fossil fuel production.
Which lines up perfectly with that Tufton Street network, IEA, ASI, TPA.
The very same Atlas members pushing for fracking and North Sea drilling, and those groups are engaging more with Reform UK.
And Reform UK's funding.
Heavily reliant on donors tied to fossil fuels or climate denial. Plus, Farage has his GB News platform.
Which also has links to the network.
Through ownership and personnel, yes, it amplifies the message.
France and Marine Le Pen. Connections less direct, you said.
Less direct to the core denial groups, yeah. But IFRAP, the Atlas affiliate, analyzes RN policies.
And IFP trains right-wing leaders with pro-RN funding.
Right. So there's proximity. RN's policies aren't always outright denial, but they lean anti-regulation, often with a nationalist spin.
Like reducing energy VAT, halting wind subsidies.
Exactly. Skepticism towards certain green policies. The influence might be more about shaping the overall policy environment there.
Lastly, Slovakia. Robert Fico. His relationship with INAS and Kai is different.
More like critical engagement. Both think tanks promote free markets, deregulation, but people from both have actually criticized Fico's government at times.
So not direct allies.
Not always. INS critiques government policies, including on energy and climate. They push market solutions. They're skeptical of the EU Green Deal.
So they influence the debate, provide arguments against stricter rules, even if they're not aligned on everything.
That seems to be the dynamic. We've actually put together a chart mapping some key politician think tank links to make this clearer.
It's just, yes, the scale of this political entanglement across so many countries is really something. It points to a very long-term strategy.
It's not just about winning the next election. It's about building an enduring infrastructure for influence.
And all this massive network and its activities, it must cost a fortune. Where does the money come from?
It's incredibly resource intensive, yeah. Funding comes from a few main sources. Big ideologically aligned foundations, corporate interests, especially fossil fuels, tobacco, pharma, and significantly opaque dark money channels.
Okay, let's break down the big donors. Koch Industries.
Central figures. Koch foundations pour vast sums into Atlas itself and key affiliates, Heritage, Heartland, Fraser, MLI, ALEC, the State Policy Network.
Supporting general operations and specific projects.
Both projects aligned with their anti-regulatory free market goals.
ExxonMobil, you mentioned them earlier.
A long history there. Funding Atlas and affiliates, especially back when climate change was first becoming a big issue. Internal documents link their funding directly to efforts to counter the global warming scare. So doubt.
Atlas offered to be a war room for them.
That's what the documents suggest, yes.
Wow. What about the Mercer Family Foundation?
Headed by Rebecca Mercer, who's also on the Heritage Board, they've put significant money into Atlas and Heartland, hedge fund wealth fueling the network.
And you mentioned dark money. What are Donors Trust and Donors Capital Fund?
They are major pass-through organizations. They allow wealthy donors to give money anonymously to conservative and libertarian causes.
So the original source is hidden.
Exactly. They channel millions to Atlas, Heartland, E&E Legal, many others. It shields donors from scrutiny. That's what dark money really means in this context, non-transparent funding.
Yeah, making it hard to track who's really behind the influence.
Very hard. And other big conservative foundations chip in too. Bradley, Scaife, Templeton are major players.
And corporations beyond Koch and Exxon.
Oh yes. Chevron, Duke Energy, Peabody Energy on the energy side, Pfizer, Bayer, Eli Lilly in pharma, Altria, Reynolds American in tobacco funding ALEC, Philip Morris funding Atlas directly, Canadian energy groups like CAPP funding MLI, finance firms pushing anti-ESG. It's broad.
How does the money actually flow?
Yeah.
Direct grants.
Direct grants, funding for specific projects. Sometimes Atlas acts as an intermediary, passing funds along, and then those anonymous channels like Donors Trust.
This isn't just random giving, is it? It's strategic.
Highly strategic. Its investment aims squarely at shaping the policy environment to favor their interests.
And you see a clear alignment between donor interests like deregulation and what the think tanks produce.
Absolutely. The think tanks provide the intellectual ammunition and the political cover for policies that directly benefit their funders.
And the network structure, the dark money, it obscures those links.
It provides separation, plausible deniability. Controversial positions can be promoted without clearly tracing back to the original funder. Plus, there's rebranding, complex organizational webs. It all adds layers of obscurity.
Okay, so money and political connections are key. But how do they actually shape public opinion? Manufacture consent?
Through a very sophisticated, multi-pronged communication strategy. It involves disinformation, tapping into divisive culture war narratives, and using a dedicated media network to amplify it all.
Let's start with disinformation and climate denial.
We see everything from flat-out denial, Heartland calling it a delusion, blaming natural cycles, to just questioning the human contribution or how severe the impacts will be.
Like the Cornwall Alliance saying there's no convincing scientific evidence.
Exactly, using that religious framing.
Yeah.
Another tactic is hyping the economic costs of climate action while totally downplaying the costs of inaction or the benefits of renewables.
And presenting fossil fuels as essential.
Essential for prosperity, lifting people out of poverty, and constantly attacking the scientific consensus, using misleading polls, elevating fringe dissenting voices.
But you said denial isn't always the main strategy now. Culture wars are playing a bigger role.
Increasingly, yes. Weaving anti-climate messages into these broader, emotionally charged narratives helps mobilize different groups.
Like the anti-ESG push,
Yeah.
framing it as woke capitalism.
Precisely. Portraying it as politically motivated, bad for business. Promoted heavily by ALEC, the State Financial Officers Foundation, pushing model bills against it.
What about the climate lockdown idea?
That was a powerful one. Deliberately linking pandemic measures to potential climate policies to paint climate action as authoritarian overreach. It spread like wildfire online, pushed by deniers and right-wing media.
And attacking activists.
Systematically vilifying them, calling them extremists, terrorists, elitists, aiming to discredit them and discourage public support for climate action. Germany's Last Generation, the UK's Just Stop Oil prime targets.
And bundling climate into the wider anti-woke backlash.
Yes, linking it with attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
What other narratives? Energy security.
Framing fossil fuels as vital for national security, national strength, and also subtly shifting blame away from corporations and systemic change towards individual lifestyle choices.
How do they get these messages out? Media amplification?
It's layered. They try to get into mainstream media with op-eds, influence reporting like Frasier and the Toronto Star.
But the core is probably the alternative media ecosystem.
That's crucial. Platforms like GB News in the UK, funded by network figures, hosts Farage, features denialist groups. Rebel News in Canada passed cock links, amplified climate lockdown.
Epoch Times, Sky News Australia, Fox News.
Epoch Times, yes, pro-Trump, conservative narratives. Sky News Australia criticizes activists. Fox News features denialist contributors like Steve Malloy from Heartland pushed climate lockdown. It's a sympathetic echo chamber.
And online platforms, social media.
Hugely important. Twitter X, Facebook, TikTok are used for rapid sharing, targeted ads, mobilization. We've even seen reports about algorithms promoting terms like climate scam. Think tanks are also using online influencers now.
So it's an integrated system, creating narratives, laundering them through think tanks, amplifying through friendly media and online.
Exactly. Injecting them into the public discourse, aiming to shape debate and ultimately policy. It's a consistent pattern we see again and again.
This international dimension seems critical too. How does that coordination work?
It significantly boosts their influence, sharing tactics, resources, building momentum across borders.
Through conferences and forums.
That's a big part of it. The Atlas Network's own events, the big Liberty Forum and Freedom Dinner regional forums, they bring hundreds of partners together for networking strategy sessions.
And LibertyCon for younger activists.
Yes, organized by Students for Liberty, which Atlas funds, cultivating the next generation.
What about older, more established groups? Mont Pelerin Society.
MPS, founded by Hayek himself, it's an elite forum, lots of overlap with Atlas membership, Koch, Shafun. Historically hosted climate skeptics like Vaclav Klaus, the foundational link.
And that new Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, ARC. Jordan Peterson's involved.
ARC, yeah. Backed by figures like Peterson, brings together international conservatives, business leaders, politicians. Features climate skeptics like Lomberg, Trump allies like Kevin Roberts from Heritage, energy execs, Atlas-linked people. It's another convergence point.
Any other forums? CPAC?
Potentially CPAC Global, World Taxpayer Conferences, Heritage Policy Summits. They create multiple venues for coordination.
Does this extend into academia?
They try to influence it through university partnerships, funding specific centers. George Mason University is often cited. They try to position themselves as more nimble, more policy relevant than traditional academia.
And curriculum development. Trying to influence schools.
Yes, like Heartland's attempts with K-12 materials questioning climate science or older ExxonMobil-funded efforts. Supporting school privatization also fits the anti-government control theme.
And bigger campaigns. Project 2025.
Project 2025 is a prime example of strategic campaign coordination. Led by Heritage, involving dozens of conservative groups, many Atlas-linked or funded. It's a detailed plan to operationalize their agenda, dismantle climate initiatives, boost fossil fuels if Trump returns.
It's the culmination of decades of network building.
Pretty much. And you see historical coordination too, like the ExxonMobil Atlas work against the Kyoto Protocol, or ALEC coordinating corporate lobbying state by state.
So this multi-level coordination, conferences, academia campaigns, ensures everyone's singing from roughly the same song sheet.
It promotes ideological coherence, allows rapid spread of tactics, develops leaders, and translates ideas into political action worldwide.
Another way they exert influence you mentioned is by embedding within power structures, the revolving door.
Exactly. The constant movement of people between government jobs, Atlas-affiliated think tanks, and the private sector, especially industries they aim to deregulate.
So former government officials bring their contacts and insider knowledge to think tanks.
And then think tank people move into government roles to implement the network's policies. Project 2025 is banking on this filling administration posts with loyalists.
You see specific examples like people moving between Heritage and the Trump administration.
Yes. Diana Furchtgott-Roth, Ed Meese, Rebecca Mercer herself on the Heritage board with close Trump ties. It happens in other countries too, like Czech think tank directors getting senior ministry roles.
What's the effect of this revolving door?
It smooths the transfer of ideology into policy, gives lobbyists better access, and aligns government actions with the network's agenda. It raises serious questions about regulatory capture.
Are regulators serving the public or the industries they came from or might go back to?
That's the concern. Then there are the direct corporate partnerships.
Beyond just funding, actual collaboration.
Yes. Coordinated campaigns like the historical Exxon Atlas anti-Kyoto work, BP funding the IEA, platforms like ALEC where corporate lobbyists literally sit down with state politicians to draft bills benefiting their industries.
That sounds incredibly direct.
It is. Or the State Financial Officers Foundation, SFOF, working with the private sector to push back against ESG, often using ALEC model bills. In Brazil, you see synergy between agribusiness and think tanks. It institutionalizes corporate influence,
And strategic litigation or lawfare,
using the courts to advance the agenda, a key tactic.
like E&E legal targeting climate scientists.
Yes, funded by coal and dark money, filing burdensome information requests against scientists like Michael Mann or institutions like NASA and the EPA. It's often seen as a form of harassment to disrupt their work and create doubt.
And challenging regulations directly in court.
CEI and others do that frequently, challenging EPA rules, environmental protections.
Does it go beyond environmental issues?
Sure. The Institute for Free Speech, funded by network donors, fights campaign finance regulations, arguing for expansive corporate political spending rights. And you can bet network legal groups would support corporations facing climate lawsuits.
So litigation is used to intimidate opponents and block unfavorable policies.
It aims to intimidate scientists, regulators, activists, and ultimately hinder climate action and regulation.
Okay, one final area. Ideological allies and potentially anti-democratic tendencies.
Yes, the network extends its reach by partnering with ideological allies like religious conservatives, and some of their activities raise concerns about democratic norms.
Like the Cornwall Alliance, linking climate denial to religious belief.
Exactly. An evangelical group framing environmentalism as anti-Christian, arguing the earth is robust and meant for human exploitation, and that restricting fossil fuels hurts the poor. Founder Beisner's links to Acton and Atlas cement this connection.
And Acton Institute itself mixes free markets and faith.
Yes, an Atlas member doing just that. Having Alejandro Chafuen, former Atlas president at Acton, solidifies that link.
And initiatives like ARC bringing religious figures into the broader conservative fold.
Right, weaving traditional values together with the anti-climate action stance. It mobilizes a specific constituency and lends a kind of moral justification.
What about the anti-democratic concerns? Election integrity.
Heritage Foundation is a major pusher of stricter voter ID laws, proof of citizenship requirements, opposing automatic registration. ALEC provides the model bills for states.
Critics argue these measures disproportionately affect minority, low-income, student, or elderly voters, right? And that the evidence of widespread fraud used to justify them is shaky.
That's the criticism, yes, that the type of fraud these laws target is rare, and the real effect is suppressing votes from demographics less likely to support Heritage ALEC allies. The Heritage voter fraud database, often cited, has been widely debunked. It can look like a partisan strategy.
And beyond voting laws.
There's rhetoric framing environmental rules or climate activism as attacks on liberty or national sovereignty, sometimes implicitly questioning democratic outcomes. Project 2025's goal of replacing career civil servants with political loyalists raises red flags. The heavy reliance on dark money fundamentally undermines transparency and accountability. Some analysis suggests the network ultimately prioritizes property rights over democratic processes when they conflict.
It certainly makes you think about the forces shaping policy behind the scenes.
Absolutely. So pulling it all together, the Atlas Network is this incredibly well-resourced, globally coordinated web of think tanks actively working to obstruct climate action and environmental regulation.
And they do it through strategic funding, often opaque, dark money, cultivating political allies via that revolving door.
Using sophisticated communication, including disinformation and culture war framing, plus extensive international coordination, deep corporate partnerships,
Strategic litigation to silence critics, and building alliances with ideological partners like religious conservatives, sometimes pushing agendas with anti-democratic implications.
the results are tangible. Delayed climate policies, weaker environmental laws, the rise of political leaders hostile to climate action, and a public conversation often polluted by misinformation.
And it's ongoing. Project 2025 shows they're constantly adapting and planning ahead.
Definitely. Which leaves us with some important questions for our listeners to ponder. What are the real implications of this hidden network for democratic accountability, for the future of environmental protection? Thinking about this deep dive, what questions does it raise for you about where your information comes from and who is really shaping the policies that affect all of us?